Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Hare Krishna. Welcome back to Bhakti Shastri online course. This is lesson 3 of unit 1. Today we're going to be looking at the first 11 verses of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In our previous lesson, lesson 2, we were looking at the arguments that Arjuna gave for withdrawing from the fight. We looked at the progressive steps leading toward destruction of the dynasty as analyzed by Arjuna. We looked at the appropriate understanding of Prabhupada's statement that women are generally not very intelligent. And we were looking at Prabhupada's statement in regard to utility of violence and when it's appropriate to use violence. Prabhupada comments in Srila Prabhupada comments in the purport to texts 39 and 40 of the first chapter that the Varnasrama religion's principles were so designed that the good population would prevail in society for the general and spiritual progress of state and community. So the topic of Varnasrama Dharma has been introduced toward the end of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Oftentimes you'll see Prabhupada refer to Varnasrama Dharma by paraphrasing with words like occupational duties and prescribed duties. He regularly uses those terms, which are like synonym of Varnasrama Dharma. So the topic of Varnasrama Dharma has come up because Arjuna has mentioned the Kula Dharma, the family traditions, and he's suggesting that if the elders of the family are killed, then the Kula Dharma, the family traditions, the religious traditions, the culture of the family will be lost. So he's mentioning Varnasrama Dharma and he's using different terminology. Kula Dharma, Kula means the family, so the religious principles which are carried on from one generation of the family to the next. Varnasrama Dharma is Kula Dharma. Jati Dharma, similarly, Jati means one's birth, so the family that one takes birth in, and the cultural traditions that are passed on from one generation of the family to the next, Varnasrama Dharma. It's also referred to as Swadharma in the second chapter by Krishna. This is interesting, the terminology Swadharma and Swakarma later in the Bhagavad Gita, because even at this stage we're still in a very preliminary section of Bhagavad Gita, and at this stage, still the exalted nature of the Vedic philosophy can be recognized. One time I was in north of Bangladesh and I met one Christian preacher there. And we were discussing, because he knew something about Vedic philosophy and Vaishnavism, being in Bangladesh, we were discussing, and I was just mentioning how in the very early sections of Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, Krishna is describing Swadharma, indicating that the duties are not the same for everybody. So already this is an advanced aspect of Krishna conscious philosophy, that according to one's nature, there are prescribed rules, prescribed regulations, prescribed standards for how one lives in this world. According to one's ashram, whether he's married or not, or he may be retired, there's all different set of duties for those respective positions in society. And according to one's varna, one's occupation, one's inclination to work, accordingly, Bhagavad Gita explains different religious principles which are suited to the nature of those particular spiritual candidates. And I was mentioning how this is a far more advanced process than what other approaches to God realization provide, where the particular nature of the candidate is not considered, and the same regulations are recommended for everybody. In Krishna consciousness, of course, there's many fundamental recommendations for everybody. However, there are also specific guidelines which can be, as we'll be discussing in these lessons, can be very supportive for our progress in Krishna consciousness. And these aspects of Varnasrama Dharma in alignment with our specific nature, which is different, and therefore Swadharma is the prescribed duties according to the category that we find ourselves in according to the Varnasrama system. ultimately we'll see that even this level, which is even this approach to progress in spiritual life in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, which is far beyond what we see in other theological systems, and yet towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, this preliminary level is also Krishna goes beyond this when he says sarva dharman purityakya mameka sharana, that ultimately the principle of mameka sharana, surrendering unto me exclusively, is the highest principle of religion, and it is on a stage which is transcendental to the regulations of the Varnasrama Dharma, which we'll be also examining over the next few lessons. Prabhupada's explaining in the purport to the second chapter what is Varnasrama Dharma in essence. Human civilization begins from the stage of Varnasrama Dharma, or specific duties in terms of the specific modes of nature of the body obtained. So according to the modes of nature which are influencing the conditioned soul, he will have a certain type of personality, a certain nature, and accordingly, influenced by the modes, the prescribed varnas are recommended. In the 13th verse of the 4th chapter, this is explained in more detail as Krishna explains that Charturvanam Maya Shrishtam, I've created the system of the 4 varnas, Guna Karma Vibhagashaha, and they are categorized. Vibhag means to categorize according to the guna and the karma, according to the qualification, the nature, the personality, the character of the candidate, and their karma, their activities. So those who are particularly influenced by the mode of goodness should follow the recommendations for the brahmanas, and those predominantly influenced by the rajaguna should follow the recommendations for the kshatriyas, which are different from the brahmanas. And similarly, those who are influenced by a mixture of raja and tamagun can follow the prescribed regulations of the vaishyas, and those who are predominantly influenced by the tamagun can follow the regulations of the sudras. And in this way, according to one's nature, one's personality, there are certain prescribed methods of behaving which will make it very easy for a person to be situated in a peaceful state of mind and make spiritual progress. So these specific duties, we'll project a little ahead to the 18th chapter and the 16th chapter of the Gita to get a deeper understanding specifically what we mean by the specific duties of the Varnasrama system as they are explained in later chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. And we'll look at it in detail now, because in order for us to fully understand the issue that is currently being discussed between Arjuna and Krishna, which centers around the Varnasrama duties, it will be helpful for us to get a more in-depth understanding of what is Varnasrama Dharma, so that we can get a better appreciation of the particular issue that is facing Arjuna at this point. Krishna is explaining in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita the specific duties for the Brahmanas: Sama, Dhamma, Tapa, Socham, Kshantim, Ajamam, Evacha, Jnanam, Vijnanam, Ashtikyam, Brahma Karma, Savavajam. The Brahma Karma, the karma or the prescribed duties for the Brahmanas, Swabhava Jam, which are determined according to the nature of the person, which Swabhava Jam they actually acquire from birth. So Krishna is explaining that that type of person who's influenced by the mode of goodness, and from the very birth that influence will be on them, that Brahminical nature, the religious duties are described sama, dhamma, tapa, socham. One should be, sama means a steadiness of mind. That means that the Brahmanas should not be agitated. Generally, personally speaking, I'm generally quite an unagitated, peaceful type of person, but I find that when I drive in India, then I get agitated very quickly. So this circumstances can cause us to become upset and emotionally disturbed, and as much as possible, the Brahmanas should avoid and always remain sama, in equipoised, in steadiness of mind. Dhamma means sense control, and the Brahmanas control the senses, particularly in their diet. They will eat only the sanctified Vishnu Prasad, and they won't eat other food. In their relationships, family relationships, they'll perform the Garbhadan Sanskar for generating children. And in this way, their life is very much sensually controlled as Brahminical life. Socham Dhamma Tapa, austerity. One has to follow the principles of spiritual life as given by the founder Acharya of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada, the 4 principles. One has to practice that simple austerity. And one has to rise early in the morning. That's also an item of tapasya. Socham, one has to be clean. A religious duty for the brahmanas is to always be clean, to bathe 2 or 3 times a day, and to keep the ashram and the clothes very clean. As Prabhupada often commented, cleanliness is next to godliness. So being clean is the religious principle for the brahmanas. Kshantir, Arjavam, tolerance, Arjavam, honesty, simplicity, Jnanam, knowledge of Shastra, Vigyan, wisdom, experience, Brahma Karma Svabhavajam. So these are the prescribed duties for the Brahmins. Now, if we look in the next verse, in the 18th chapter, text 43, Krishna explains the prescribed duties for the Kshatriyas, and they are inherently quite different from those of the Brahmanas. Soyam, Tejas, Dhriti, Daksham, Jute, Chapayapalayanam, Dhanam, Ishvarabhavishya, Kshatrakama, Svabhavajam. That the Kshatriya karma, the prescribed duties of the Kshatriyas, is Soryam, heroism. The Kshatriya has to be a brave hero. Tejas, he has to be very powerful, very strong, mentally and physically. Dhriti has to be very determined. You can see that these characteristics are quite, you could say, different from those of the Brahmanas, who don't necessarily need to be physically strong. They similarly don't need to be so expert in dealing with the material energy, managing the material energy, because in the Brahminical approach, one's consciousness is more upon self-realization and theology, and the Brahmin may not be so expert in dealing with the material energy like a Kshatriya should be, very expert, Daksha, Dhriti, very determined, obstinate, and prepared to hold one's ground. There's also a Brahmana may not be so much inclined to enter into conflict, and if somebody is imposing upon the field of that Brahmana, then he's quite happy to just pack up and go some other place, find another tree under which to teach the Vedic literature, and is not so much attached. Whereas the Kshatriya is Daksha and Dhriti, very determined, and won't give up so easily. And Jute Chapya Palayanam, courageous in battle. Prabhupada gives the example that the Kshatriya should be wounded on the front, not wounded on the back as he was retreating. Dhanam, charity, and Ishvarabhav, leadership. They're quite comfortable in telling people what to do, in taking over control, in organizing people, in ordering people. This is the nature of the Kshatriya. And these are the religious principles. By following the Kshatriya is considered to be pious and religious. And the Vaishyas, Krishi Goraksha Vanijam, Vaishya Karma Svabhavajam. Krishi means farming, Goraksha, cow protection. Vaishya Karma, this is particularly the duty of the Vaishyas. Pardishcharyatmakam Karma, Shudra Shafi Svabhavajam. For the Sudras is labor and assisting the others. And in this way, there are different categories according to one's nature, and there's different prescribed duties. Of course, by following these duties, then the various classes of society all work very cooperatively together, and in that way, society is very peacefully organized. After all, Chaturvana Maya Shrishtam, this system was enunciated by the Lord himself, and we see society, whether in the past or the present, that this inclination amongst people is pretty much what we see. There is an intelligent class, a more theoretical type people who are absorbed in working with their intelligences and mind. There's the Kshatriyas, who are very powerful, strong personalities, who leadership, organize others, and management. And then there's the business type, good at making money, good at producing food. And those who don't have a particular qualification in the 3 categories mentioned, and they fall into the Sudra class, which is the majority of people. And basically, if you can't do business, or you can't produce food, or if you can't manage and lead others, or if you can't make a living by educating others in philosophy, then you have to assist the others. And actually particularly in Kali Yuga, Kalu Shudra Sambhava, most people are in the Sudra category. If one is actually employed and is regularly accepting the wage, regardless of his birth, then he's considered a Sudra because he's serving someone in a superior position. Ultimately, it's better to have more independence in one's income. If one can do business, that's better because one can be independent and doesn't not necessarily have to compromise values in order to get the employment facilities. And so these higher occupational duties make it easier for a person to practice Krishna consciousness. And in terms of why we mention higher, because you can see by analyzing the respective motivation of a person, we can determine what classification they are in. The Brahmins are motivated by purity, and in pursuit of purity, they behave, and that is their interest. And the Kshatriyas, their interest is justice and righteousness, and where there is wrong, to make it right, if even they're risking one's own life. So this is very noble, these qualities and these motivations. If a person is prepared to risk their own life to protect another, that's a very elevated quality, and therefore the Kshatriyas are respected and considered very senior in society. And similarly, the Brahmins, who are interested in self-purification and purity, that's a very exalted interest and state of mind. The Vaishyas, however, their main motivation will be making profit. And the Sudras, their main motivation, in other words, upon which the considerations upon which they make decisions will be the amount of sense enjoyment that I'll get. And based upon that, they'll make decisions. So in this way, according to the character, one is classified, and we can see that the higher classifications are reflecting higher quality and higher characteristic. It's not that everyone is equal, and it's foolish to propagate such a philosophy. But we're not equal. We are differently situated according to the various qualities and nature that we have cultivated. And these different types of personalities you'll find in all societies, and in that way the Maya Shrishtam, the system of religious principles that Krishna has designed according to these classifications, is very scientific, and by following it is a very effective way to bring about peace and harmony in society. In the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna goes on to explain in detail some of the religious principles for the ashrams, beginning with the sannyasis. In text number 1, abhayam shatrashang shudhi jnana yoga vibhashtitaha. That the sannyasis are abhayam. That means that they're not concerned about their bodily maintenance, about their place of residence and their meals. And the genuine sannyasis will actually not be interested or concerned in arranging these things, but they will rely upon the arrangement of the Lord, which would be facilitated through the other members of the society. And generally the householders are generally expected to look after the sannyasis and the renunciates and to maintain them, and in that way the sannyasis can remain abhay. They can remain completely aloof from concerns for maintaining their body, and be, as Krishna is explaining, jnana yoga vibhashtitaha. Vibhashtiti, they're situated in jnana yoga. Jnana yoga vibhashtitaha means that the sannyasis are always absorbed. Vibhashtitaha, they're situated, they're preoccupied with philosophy. Jnana yoga. When Mahaprabhu arrived in Jagannath Puri, and the Bhattacharya Sarvabhauma saw he was such a young man, he was 24 years old. How is it possible that he can remain in the sannyas ashram, in the renounced life, being so handsome and so young? And the Bhattacharya, he suggested that I will teach. I will make the sannyasi Chaitanya, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, I will recite to him the Vedanta Sutra, and by hearing, being absorbed in the philosophy of Atma-tattva, then he will be able to remain in the renounced order and sustain his sannyas. So the sannyasis are always absorbed in philosophy, in educating others, in preaching Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada writes in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the duty of the sannyasis is to contribute literary works. In this way, they are always absorbed, and such activities are considered the religious duties of those in the renounced order of life. For the Vanaprasthas, tapa, and means austerity, particularly when one is leaving, having left the grihastha life where one is surrounded by the facilities and the comforts and the luxuries of family life, and enjoying these things. One spends some time, having left family life as a vanaprastha, living in the renounced order. The Vanaprasthas spend time away from the comforts of material life, living a life of tapasya, austerity. Prabhupada recommends, when he's discussing Vanaprastha ashram in the Srimad Bhagavatam first canto, he recommends that the followers of the Krishna consciousness movement can reside in Sridham Mayapur or Sri Vrindavan Dham, and there practice Krishna consciousness in a very simple way. The Vanaprasthas can perform all types of bratas, chaturmasya, Bhishma Pancha, Kartik month, so many different bratas that may be difficult for the householders to perform, and even the itinerant preachers, the sannyasis. And in this way, the Vanaprastha can completely, by practicing austerity, can completely purify himself from his identification in householder life. And many examples of Vanaprasthas in our Shastras. When Haridas Thakur delivered the prostitute in Benapole, then he left the ashram and he requested her to remain in that ashram there as a Vanaprastha, Mataji, and she was chanting lakhs and lakhs of rounds every day and eating very simply. Many examples. In the Bhagavatam of Vanaprasthas, the Pandavas gave up householder life and went to the forest. Gandhari and Dhritarashtra also accepted the Vanaprastha ashram and gave up a householder life, left home, and they were instructed by Vidura. And in this way, Vanaprastha life is the preliminary stage to sannyas, and one can enter it after householder life to purify himself of the attachments to householder life. In Grihastha life, Dhanam, Dhamma and Jagya, controlling the senses, giving charity and performing sacrifice. Of course, in the Krishna consciousness movement, our Grihasthas can perform Jagya by performing Sankirtan Jagya. They can perform Dhanam by giving charity to various Krishna conscious projects and contributing toward the spreading of Krishna consciousness all over the world. And Dhamma, sense control, by following the principles of Krishna conscious life as given to us by our founder Acharya A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and living a simple life, controlling the senses, and particularly giving charity is recommended for the householders, because householders become so attached to their personal facilities. There's the couch where Pitaji likes to sit, and his special plate, and one becomes so attached to these things, and his bed, the place where he takes bath, all of these things, keeps his toothbrush in the same place, becomes very attached to these things, householder life. So one gives charity, or one invites the mendicant preachers, itinerant preachers, to one's home, and the brahmacharis, and one should, all of the facilities and the comfortable objects that one has in one's home, one can utilize in the service of the Vaishnavas, and in this way one can purify one's household. When Parikshit Maharaj greeted the great sage Shukdev Goswami as he was approaching Parikshit, as he was fasting on the bank of the Ganga at that time, Parikshit quoted regarding receiving a saintly person, Yeshang Shangshmaranat Sadya Shudjanti Vai Griha, that just by remembering, Smaranat, a great Vaishnava, Sadya Shudjanti Vai Griha, one's household becomes completely purified just by remembering a Vaishnava. King Puna Sparshana, Darshana Sparshana, what to speak of seeing the Vaishnava or touching the Vaishnavas, Pada Shoch Ashanadibi, or washing their lotus feet, Pada Sochan, Ashan Adibi, or even offering them a seat, Ashan Adibi. I remember from my years of living in the jungles of Bangladesh, where we were preaching in villages, that we would be touring in the village, and the villagers, the simple villagers, would come out onto the road and they would literally beg us. They would fall at our feet and beg us, and sometimes they would take us by the hand and just to bring us to their courtyard. Just so momentarily there would be a chair, a wooden chair that was in the home. Not many chairs in the cottages and the villages of Bengal, actually, not so many chairs. People generally have a cot, and they sit on the cot and sleep on the cot and sit on the floor for prasadam. They don't have chairs with the back and everything. So if they have chairs, it's usually quite a prestigious thing that they reserve for special occasions. So they bring the chair, and the chair is in the courtyard, and everyone's gathered around, and just for a few moments, if you can just sit in the chair, they will beg you, just please sit. Asan Adivi, please accept a seat in my home. Understanding that my home will be purified just by offering a seat to a Vaishnava. And of course, once seated down, then they've got you, then they'll try and bring eatables. to get you to eat something, and then even more purifying for the householder. So householders should give charity. I sometimes muse over the phenomena I see in India where you buy the fridge and they have a lock on the fridge. Of course, people won't buy a fridge without a lock because someone is... Well, at any time, someone could loot the fridge. Family members also. So we keep it locked up. And so achar and my other pickles, and we keep them for me. So this is the tendency. We want the fridge with a lock because we become so attached to all of the comforts of household life. Regular meals, comforts, etc., etc. And householder, therefore Varnaprastha life is recommended. Everybody should take Varnaprastha. Some can take sannyas, but everyone should take Varnaprastha. Sometime one can remain with wife in Varnaprastha, live together in a simple cottage in the holy Dham, chant Hare Krishna. And for the householders, particularly the religious duty is to give charity. For the brahmachari, the study of the Vedic literature. And in this way, the specific duties of the Varna and Ashram are described in the Bhagavad Gita in the 16th and the 18th chapters. In verses 39 and 40 of the first chapter, Prabhupada explains what is the result of a person that follows the system of Varna Ashram, which we've just explained to you. And Prabhupada explains that in the system of Varna Ashram institution, there are many principles of religious traditions to help members of the family grow properly and attain spiritual values. So from all aspects of life, there will be growth, there will be development, there will be prosperity, there will be harmony and peace in society, both individually and communally, by following the Varna and Ashram system that Krishna recommends. And, as Prabhupada mentions here, attain spiritual values. One will become inclined toward spiritual life just by following these regulations of the Varna and Ashram system. In and of themselves, the Varnasram regulations are not necessarily on the transcendental level because they're dealing with the activities of this material world. As we'll be explaining over the next few lessons, that simply by following this without Krishna consciousness will not yield tangible result. Prabhupada's mentioning here in these purports in the second chapter, texts 31 and 32, that at best, by following Varnasrama Dharma perfectly, one is elevated to the heavenly planets. Discharging one's specific duty in any field of action in accordance with the orders of higher authorities, that means the Varna and Ashram system, serves to elevate one to a higher status of life, And gradually, very gradually, one is elevated through the different classifications. One time, one astrologer came and visited Navadip Chandra in his home in Mayapur. And Navadip Chandra, Sri Gosunda, he asked that astrologer, so you're a very expert astrologer, can you tell me what I was in my previous life? And the astrologer immediately, he begins to make calculations and going into meditation, and he's seeing the supreme opulence of the Supreme Lord, Narayan, in all opulence, and the different opulence of the different avatars, das avatars. He's completely overwhelmed by this. And Mahaprabhu is saying, come on, what I was in my previous life? Give me a little more time. This is some pretty amazing visions I'm having here. And then he said, my conclusion, having meditated on you and done the calculations, is that in your previous life, you were the Supreme Lord Narayan. And Mahaprabhu said, wrong. I know for a fact that in my previous life, I was a cowherd boy. And because I nicely looked after the cows, in this life, I've been elevated and taken birth in a Brahmin family. Of course, this is the sweet Mahaprabhu's Leela, Sri Gaura Moduri Leela. Jar Karne Praveshila, just by hearing the sweet pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Hridoy Nirmal Bhelotar. Our heart becomes completely purified. So the point being, Mahaprabhu is, of course, this is Leela, but Mahaprabhu is explaining how by following the duties according to one's situation in the Varnasrama system, one's gradually elevated. So the Vaishya will become a Kshatriya, the Kshatriya will become a Brahmin. In that way, gradually, one is elevated, but it takes a long time. And therefore, as we'll be discussing later, that Narad Muni, he rejects this system. He chastises Vyasadeva. This system is too slow. Just give them hearing and chanting. Just give them harikotha, srinvatam swakatha Krishna. Just give them hearing and chanting about Krishna. And that way they can very quickly awaken love for Krishna. Nitam Bhagavat Sevaya, Evam Prashanna Manasha, Bhagavat Bhakti Yogatha, Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam, Mukta Sangasha Jayate. Just by Nitam Bhagavat Sevaya, by hearing and chanting, one can get completely liberated. As we'll be discussing in subsequent lessons, is not so much relied upon in the Bhagavat Marga or the process of Krishna consciousness of hearing and chanting. Prabhupada's commenting that Svaga Dharma Apavritam, that by you performing your prescribed duties, in this case of Arjuna, if he fights in the battle, then Svaga Dvaram, that will open the door of heaven. So simply by performing, in this case, the Kshatriya duties of being a hero and Juti Chapi Apalayanam, being courageous in battle and not turning away from the battle, the result of Arjuna doing that will elevate him to the heavenly planets. Prabhupada's elaborating even more detail. Whoever executes his occupational duty, Swadharma, for 100 births. 100 births. For instance, if a Brahmin continues to act as a Brahmana for 100 births, that means without any time deviating from the strict standards of Brahminical life, rising early, controlling the senses, taking bath, living a simple life, honest, for 100 births, he'll be promoted to Brahmaloka, the planet where Lord Brahma lives, and that's not a liberated situation. That's still within the material world. So these are some aspects of the Varnasrama Dharma that we can consider, and we will subsequently discuss in more detail in relation to the issue that Arjuna is facing. We can see that he's somewhat confused about his duty. He's confused, and he's considering that the duties of the Brahmana, like tolerance, like forgiveness, like detachment, should be followed. But in the case of Arjuna being a Kshatriya, this is not appropriate dharma for him to follow. But he's very much confused about that. The initial response that Krishna makes to Arjuna's arguments for withdrawing from the fight, not very much appreciative. Krishna explains in the second verse of chapter 2, Sri Bhagavan Vacha, Kutas Tashmalam idam Vishame Shamupaishtitam Anarya Jushtam Ashvarigam Akirti Karyam Arjuna. The words he's using are very powerful and very strong words. That from where has this Kashmalam, from where has this dirtiness, Kashmalam, overtaken you? From where has it come from? In other words, this is not appropriate for a Kshatriya, for a hero of your caliber. Vishame Shamupaishtitam Anarya, it is anarya, it is uncultured. Ashvargyam, it does not lead to higher planets. Akirti, it does not lead to fame and reputation. Klaibhyam masma, text 3, Klaibhyam mashamagama partha, noitat tvai upapadyate kshudram hridayado bhalyam chaktutishta parantapa. It is, Krishna is explaining, your petty weakness of heart, kshudram. Kshudram means small time, petty. Hridaya dhobalya, this weakness of heart, this cowardice. Klaibhyam, this impotence. So Krishna's words to Arjuna are very provocative words, considering the character of Arjuna being such a hero and so much worshipped and so much respected by the whole of the society. Krishna actually is somewhat inciting Arjuna. He is agitating Arjuna by these insulting words, so that Arjuna's real nature will arise. Chaktutishta, abandon this. Chaktutishta means abandon this mentality, this cowardice mentality, which is so inappropriate for you. Chaktutishta, and get up. O Parantapa, get up. Rise to the occasion. O Parantapa, chastiser of the enemy. Now, in lecturing on these verses, Prabhupada is commenting in regard to Arjuna's response and showing the nature of the relationship between Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna's response, Prabhupada is paraphrasing and lecturing in 1968. Prabhupada is paraphrasing Arjuna. You killed the demon Madhu, therefore your name is Madhusudan. But you are asking me to kill my grandfather and teacher. That is the hint. So Prabhupada is explaining that by referring to Krishna as Madhusudan, Arjuna is implying that, yes, you killed Madhu, but I'll be referred to as Bhishmashudan. You killed one demon whose name was Madhu. You were asking me to be Bhishma Sudan. Bhishma is my grandfather, and Drona Sudan. So how can I be that? So the relationship between Krishna and Arjuna in this case is of equals. And Krishna he's insulting Arjuna, and Arjuna is also, you could say, tit for tat. He's not insulting Krishna, but he is arguing back, and he is, in a way, he's humoring. You're Madhusudan, but I'll be called Bhishma Sudan. So the relationship was very much of equals. And now, we'll see now a major shift from text 7 onwards, a major shift in the nature of the relationship between Arjuna and Krishna. And let us examine this in more detail. Karpanya dosho bhavatashvabhava prichami tam dharma shamuda chetaha yat shreyashan nishtitam bruhitan me shishashteham shadimam tam prapanam. Now I am confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple, and the soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. For those hearers who are taking the full Bhakti Shastri program and are learning the verses for memorization, this is one of the memorization verses. Some advice while learning verses. We recommend that you take the time to learn the word-for-word synonyms, at least for some of the key words in a verse. Because by understanding some of the key words, then that will make it very easy for you to apply that verse in all different types of situations by being able to recognize the essence of the instructions that Krishna has given and seeing their relevance. For example, Krapanya dosho pata shabhava. Swabhava. I have become affected by this nature. Prichami tvam dharma shamudachet. Prichami, I am inquiring from you, and I've become dharma shamudha chetasa. Dharma shamudha. Mudha means fooled, and shamudha means completely bewildered. Prabhupada gives the word for word, bewildered, completely. So dharma shamudha chetaha. In my mind, in my heart, I am feeling completely confused. Dharma shamudha chetaha. Yat shreya, that which is ultimately beneficial for me. Nishchitam bruhitan me. Bruhitan, you tell me. But you tell me in a way which is nishchitam. Nishchitam means certainly. And Prabhupada explains in the translation, tell me for certain. It's very significant. And nishchit, irrevocably, you could say authoritatively, conclusively. Nishchitam bruhi. You tell me conclusively, without any further doubt. Shishashteham, I am your disciple. Shadimam tam prapanam, I have surrendered unto you. So by understanding these key words of the verse, we can really appreciate the principles behind the verse. By understanding the key words in the verse, it makes it very easy for us to quote sections of the verse in relation to the various principles that the verse is presenting. In the purport, Prabhupada makes some very interesting comments about the spiritual master as Shishashteham, I am your disciple, Arjuna. He's mentioning, and Prabhupada's commenting that without approaching a spiritual master, one must approach a spiritual master who is in succession. A person with a bona fide spiritual master is supposed to know everything. Prabhupada's paraphrasing there. Acharyavan, Prabhupada's translating here the Vedic aphorism, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, that by having shelter of a spiritual master, one knows everything. Because the spiritual master is the person who's qualified to solve the problems of the disciple by engaging him in Krishna consciousness. In this way, one knows everything if one has a spiritual master. In the parampara. In text number 8, Prabhupada further continues that, text number 8, I'll read the translation. I can find no means to drive away this grief which is drying up my senses. I will not be able to dispel it even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like demigods in the heaven. So Prabhupada's explaining here the ineffectiveness of what material world has to offer in terms of solving our inherent problems of life. Academic knowledge, scholarship, high position, etc. are all useless in solving the problems of life. Help can be given only by a spiritual master like Krishna. The conclusion is that the spiritual master who is 100% Krishna conscious is the bona fide spiritual master if he can solve the problems of life. He solves those problems of life, just like Arjuna is currently experiencing by awakening the disciples' dormant Krishna consciousness and training the disciple how to function in his eternal constitutional position as servant of Krishna, Jiv Krishna Dasi Bishash Koleto Adukanai, and by being reinstated in one's constitutional position as a servant of Krishna, one can remove all miseries from his life. And this is the actual responsibility and objective of the spiritual master. Prabhupada's quoting that anyone can become a spiritual master, regardless of ashram, kibra vipra kibra nashi, shudra kani noi jai Krishna tattva veta. Those who know the science of Krishna, shei guru hoy, they can become a spiritual master. A Vaishnava guru na sat, Vaishnava swapacha guru. Even a person who is a guru, but non-Vaishnava, should not be accepted. And the Vaishnava who's born in the family of dog eaters, who's become a Vaishnava, even though born in a family of dog eaters, according to the Hari Bhakti Vilas, Padma Purana, such a Vaishnava can become a guru. Prabhupada is commenting on the Karpanya dosha, the weakness of heart, which has overcome Arjuna, miserliness. Prabhupada's lecturing on this verse that he's thinking that I've become Kripana, Karpanya dosha. A miser, although I have got strength, I am denying to fight. Although I have got money, I do not spend. These are called Kripana. So Karpanya dosho pahata. I am now infected with the Karpanya dosh. So to conclude, Prabhupada's explaining that Arjuna argued religious principles should be given more importance than politics or sociology. But he did not know that knowledge of matter, soul, and even the supreme is more important than religion. Let's read concluding quote by Srila Prabhupada in text 11. Arjuna argued that religious principles should be given more importance than politics or sociology. So in that case, Prabhupada is referring to Arjuna's arguments about withdrawing from the fight on the basis of the Brahminical principles of non-violence, of tolerance and detachment. And he's thinking that those principles are higher than simply the political intrigue and retaliation of the wrongdoers in the battle, or even sociology. But he did not know, as Prabhupada continues, knowledge of matter, soul, and the supreme is even more important than religious formularies. Religious formularies there can be referring to the whole of the Varnasrama system. And we'll see that Krishna will begin in the next lesson to instruct Arjuna in the spiritual science of Atma Tattva. Krishna will begin to respond to Arjuna's bewilderment and his illusion and his state of ignorance by teaching him the principles of Atma Tattva, of the science of the soul, in the subsequent verses of the second chapter. Let's conclude our lesson today. We were discussing the principles of Varnasrama Dharma, its definition and how it works, the modes of nature that influence the various Varnas, the various duties of the respective Varnas and ashrams, and the results of following Varnasrama Dharma. And we were discussing the general principles drawn from Arjuna's dilemma and the importance of surrendering to a spiritual master. And we were discussing the relevance of these principles in our own practice of Krishna consciousness. Let's conclude with this comment from Srila Prabhupada. Father and teacher is advised by Chanakya Pandit that you should always chastise your son and disciple. Always find out mistake. Don't be angry. But it is the business of the teacher and the father simply to find out your mistakes, not to find your good things. Never recognize the disciple's business or son's business as very good. Then he will spoil. That is injunction of Chanakya Muni. So far we are concerned, when our spiritual master used to chastise, we took it as a blessing. That was very nice. And he would chastise like anything. Damn, rascal, foolish, stupid, anything. All good words. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.